Right now, there's about three pitchers that I really think are forcing the hand of the Royals coaching staff. One coming in the rotation and two coming in the bullpen. They are next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_5. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. We're about 70 subscribers away from 1,200, which is our new goal for opening day 2024, which now, of course, is just 3 weeks away. So 21 days to get about 70 more subscribers. So if you've already subscribed, send it to somebody who has not so we can continue to boost those numbers. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Speaking of opening day, no better place to go buy your tickets right now than with Gametime and get some money off by using our code of Locked On MLB. So if you're thinking about buying those tickets or maybe do a concert, comedy show, just some sort of event that you could buy tickets to, head over to Gametime. They've got the best possible deals. They make it very easy on you. No stress. They get you those tickets in a timely manner so you don't have to worry about anything. And they're one of our great sponsors today for this Thursday edition of Locked On Royals. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, I work here and I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Got a show once a week over there. And then Monday through Friday, I got a show on ESPN Kansas City, though that's actually going to be changing in the future. Stay tuned on that if you are following me in the radio world. Not going to be doing that show anymore, but there will be bigger and better things that we're going to be moving on to. And I'll have plenty more to discuss with that over the next few weeks or so. So if you started listening to me on 1510 ESPN Kansas City, that show no longer is going to be on, but it's because of another conflict that'll happen. So that'll be told to you all in the future. Again, if you are listening to me in the radio world, if you're just listening to this podcast, that's totally fine as well. You know where to find me, and you know that you're getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Well, to kick off the show today, I thought it would be a good time just to basically give a recap of what's happened over the last few weeks and more specifically the last few days with a couple of the guys that have thrown and three guys that I really think are, I said forcing the hand at the beginning of this show. I think two of them are forcing the hand. One of them never really had to worry about a roster spot. I think you know where I'm going with this, with the guys that are listed on today's log. Brady Singer is somebody that didn't really need to have a good or a bad spring. He was going to be in the rotation regardless. I don't think he was ever in jeopardy of it. But what I have been impressed with is he has looked really good, one. And two, you go back to last year where he didn't really have that chance to build up his arm in spring training. And it showed early on in the regular season, he was just simply not at full strength. He was not, really worked in to the rotation as smoothly as you could in spring training. He started on the fourth or fifth day of the season, and it never really was that great. Velocity wasn't that good. Secondary pitches weren't that good, but it feels like he's using a lot of his new pitches, and that's important. Whether it's the slider or it's a sweeper, the four seem to give him more control. That two-seamer's now got some really good run to it. I had the chance to see the actual game the other night against Chicago and got to see all three innings of Brady Singer. And aside from a couple of at-bats, which happens in spring training where they get away from you hit a guy, he was very sharp. He was doing exactly what 2022 Brady Singer would do, which would be getting ahead. And if you got down two strikes on Brady Singer, he could tell you he was throwing the slider or the sweeper, and you still were not going to be able to hit it. I mean, I thought it was some really sharp stuff that we were seeing from the tall right-hander. Again, his spot was not in jeopardy. So let's all get that out in the open. And he's only made, I think, 3 starts now. it was only 2 starts. He's had a couple, I know. But so far, so good. He hasn't allowed a run yet. He's getting a lot of swings and misses. The velocity sounds like it's good. You don't always get the accurate radar gun down in Surprise. But I've been impressed, man, because this is something that is going to be a development throughout the season if the rotation's really going to be that good. If you can consistently count on Walker, Lugo, and Reagans, and then you get a bounce back version of Singer, we've said this over and over again on the show, boy, it takes you to a new level. It really can take this rotation to a new level. It's spring training. I think my favorite saying of spring training is nobody's as good as they seem and nobody's as bad as they seem. It doesn't really matter about the numbers, but as I've said, the velocity, the pure stuff, that's what I'm paying attention to. I give Brady Singer an A grade on that. I think it's been pretty solid. I've got no complaints on my name. Second guy I wanted to dissect a little bit was Angel Serpa. I thought he was really sharp the other day against Seattle through 3 innings. I think 40 total pitches, 30 of them were strikes. So quite the accuracy there, was just completely going after guys. And a lot of those players he was facing, some hitters he was facing, they were everyday players in Seattle's lineup. Like, those were the everyday guys. And that's something very impressive about Angel Serpa, and it's always been this way. He's not afraid to throw strikes. And that, to me, is going to be what gets him into Kansas City's bullpen on opening day. Of course, injuries and guys slowly being worked in is going to be a factor. If, John McMillan and Carlos Hernandez can't go, and Matt Sauer hasn't thrown in a little bit, so maybe Matt Sauer isn't as much of a lock as I thought he would, the door's opening for a guy like Angel Serpa, especially since he's a lefty. But where are some of these other lefties out there? Jake Brentz, for example, who's walked 12 guys in 4 outings and has an ERA in the 30s and a whip in the 6s. Jake Brentz isn't going to make this team. Josh Taylor, chance, but I look at Serpa, and he's somebody that can run it up there anywhere from 94 to 97. Firm fastball, that slider, boy, it looked good against Seattle. I think he is really putting himself in a spot where it's hard to turn him away. I mean, if you throw strikes out of the bullpen and you're not in a high leverage role where you need elite 90, 99 stuff, 98, 99, I should say, you're going to have a spot. Like, if Angel Serpa can be the long relief guy, well, won't you want somebody who can throw strikes? I mean, it sounds so simple, but a lot of Royals guys couldn't throw strikes last year. A lot of bullpen arms couldn't throw strikes. He's somebody that can. 3 years, and no, he's not had a lot of experience so far in the big leagues. I think still around 55 to 56 innings. He's walked 12 guys. Like, this has been a very common theme for him in his entire professional career. He doesn't walk anybody. And that is the new thinking of the Royals, is that you want guys that can pound the zone. You don't need to throw 98, 99, 100, but it's got to have some form of life to it. But it's good for Serpa that this is a guy we don't really enough. I mean, he won't be 25 years old until the end of the year, till late September. There could be a future for him in Kansas City. I don't know what role it could be. I don't know if he's a starter. I don't know if he's a reliever, a back-end guy. Right now, I'd put him in the bullpen as kind of your long relief guy. I like him against all the other lefties that are battling it out in spring training. The stuff looks really good. And the Royals starting the other day, that's kind of giving me a sign that I think they want him to maybe grab that 5th spot if Jordan Lyles can't go, or he'll be right behind him. Daniel Lynch, I don't think is going to get it. I do not think that Sam Long, even with a good spring, is going to get it. Walter Pennington still needs time. What a story out of camp coming about Tyler Duffy, with melanoma being detected last week on him. And fortunately, time, a really cool story from what the reporters were reporting down there. Annie Rogers being one of them. I believe it was her story as well. But, that's another factor of maybe puts him behind the 8 ball, because I think he said the hope is to get back by the end of spring training into some games. So he may not be built up again. He may need to go down to AAA Omaha whenever, he does rejoin the team. He might be in extended spring training for all we know. But to me, the top lefty on this team for the bullpen left and in the battling out spots, next to Will Smith being one of the lefties, it's got to be Serpa for me. And lastly, we already talked a little bit about him, so I don't need to be long-winded on this. Alec Marsh was so good on, wasn't that Tuesday night? I think it was Tuesday night against Chicago. Really, really good stuff. His velocity was running it up 96, 97. Just knew where the ball was going. You could see the confidence and the swagger from him. And I think he knows he's one of those guys fighting for a spot. But like Serpa, forcing the Royals coach's hands. I mean, do you really want him in Omaha? Do you really want to stash somebody like that who could give you upper end stuff as a fifth, sixth inning guy or sixth, seventh inning guy? It'd be hard to turn him down right now. This is a guy that's had a really good spring. Strikeout numbers are good. Velocity's pretty good. Him and Serpa are doing pretty much everything they can to get onto the opening day roster. Some injuries have opened the door for them. But as I said with Nick Prado in one of our episodes this week, they are doing exactly what young players need to do. You just force the hand of your coaches. Make them make the tough decision. So we'll see if they are the front runners in about 3 weeks or so. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's break down a little bit of the Royals' top 30. One guy that I think is going to skyrocket up that list, and one guy I think that's a little too lowly rated. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to one of the sponsors today in Amazon Fire TV. It is a really good way to catch all the upcoming events that you may have, March Madness, NBA. There's so many shows that you can watch right now. I mean, setting up Fire TV is pretty easy to do. It's seamless. It's one of the best ways, I think, that you can watch TV nowadays. Now, it's your destination, too, for sports, live games, the highlights, to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's the opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. I mean, endless opportunities with Amazon Fire TV. As I mentioned, you can just plug it into your existing TV, just a little stick that you have, and you're going to have access to all those movies, TV shows, free and live TV, baseball, basketball, endless, as I said, endless opportunity. So go and get a Fire TV today. Get that little stick that you can plug into your TV and really just have all the possibilities in the world of want to go out there and watch. I strongly suggest it. Well, the Royals had their brand new top 30 come out for prospects, and we know that this prospect list is not the most loaded. There's only one top 100. He is the number one prospect in the system, in Blake Mitchell, of course, their first-round pick from last year. But I would say there's a few guys on the list that I think need to be discussed a little bit more. One guy that I'm just so openly rooting for, and I can't wait to see him in Kansas City. And then some guys I think that are going to fly under the radar a little bit, that are in the 20s and, late teens, I think. Starting it off with somebody that is in the top 10, but I think is going to be maybe number 1 or 2 by the end of the year. That's Blake Walters. So a little bit of inside information, a little bit of a story I can give you that, take it for what it is. A guy can still be young, and everybody's always going to talk up their own guy. But when we went down to Surprise, multiple conversations were had with, front office personnel, coaches down there, the minor league field, and what was going on in their camp. And I think just about everybody brought up the fact that Blake Walters is freakishly good. Second-round pick from last year, and they're raving about him. And I think he's going to be one of those young guys that gets to start in like Columbia right off the get-go, and I don't even think he'll be in Columbia that long. They're going to ease him into it. There's no need to rush him at such a young age. But, I mean, the velocity is already at 95, 96, sometimes 97, and that was the intriguing part about him coming out of the draft. I think that he is somebody that is going to skyrocket up the board in no time. I think the upside is so tremendous. And people were talking about that pick back when the Royals took him. It was, wow. I mean, you went not under slot a ton like you did with Frank Mozzicato a couple years before, but Blake Mitchell instead of Kyle Teal, it might have opened the door for the back-to-back picks of Blake Walters and Hero Wyatt, who I also think is going to rise up those boards rather quickly. I mean, these are two prep arms that I really think have that top 100 elite level stuff where in a year or two, now you're talking about, man, these are going to be some anchors for the rotation one day. Now, it's early to say that. We haven't even seen him pitch in a professional game yet. And prospects can always bust, right? It's not like they are a for sure thing. I mean, we're talking about an 18, 19-year-old kid, but I can say this with complete honesty and transparency. The talk of minor league camp when we were down in Surprise, Arizona was Blake Walters. That this kid had just electric stuff in his live bullpen sessions that was just raising eyebrows left and right of, wow, this kid's going to be somebody. This is going to be a kid that we talk about in 2 years, and you're going to be pretty damn glad that you took him in the second round when you did. A guy that's a little bit later down the list, he falls a few spots behind Walters, I think about 7 or 8 spots behind Blake at 7, I think it is. Javi Vaz. Javier Vaz has already gotten a little bit of playing time in spring training. I thought it was awesome that he was a non-roster invite. I mean, this was a 15th round pick out of Vanderbilt. I mean, just screamed Tony Kemp type of player, screamed Cedric Mullins type of player. No small guy, but can bounce around a little bit. And then the Cedric Mullins comparison that I had is because this power, started to show a little bit when he got to Kansas City. This is just a pure hitter. I mean, he is going to be one of those fan favorites, I believe, when it's all said and done. And he's, kind of having that minor league success that Vinny Pasquantino had. Now it's a night difference. You're talking about a huge power hitter and a first baseman and a very small $160 outfielder that doesn't have anywhere near the same power. But I think in terms of his progression through the levels and how he never really had that dip, never really had that moment in AA or AAA where he really struggled. Javi Vaz got promoted to AA near the end of the year. I think had anywhere from 95 to 110 plate appearances, and his OBP was north of 400. Like, he got even better in AA. And it wasn't a 20 at bat, 30 at bat sample size. This was about a fourth of a season in AA. So you start him again there, and I think that he could realistically get in AAA toward a year. And then you're talking about early next year. No need to rush him, by the way. That's what I'm kind of going with here. But he's already gotten some run at big league camp. He's somebody to keep your eye on. I've talked about Javier a lot. He might be my favorite prospect next to somebody like Hero Wyatt or Blake Walters. But, man, I think he deserved to be a little bit higher on that list. I think he is somebody that is going to really translate well to the big league level. And then I get down in the 20s. I think somebody like Hunter, a draft pick from last year, is very underrated. Spencer Nivens, Carson Roccaforte, a couple of the guys they took last year. I mean, I really just think the Royals, kind of very sneakily, I should say, had a good draft. I think later in those rounds, I think they hit on a couple of guys, or at least I believe those are going to be guys they hit on. It remains to be seen, right? It's going to take a few years for that to truly come to fruition. But I think that there are some sleepers that they took in the draft. Guys with a legitimate bat, guys that can really have that athletic and flexibility, or athleticness and flexibility to bounce around to a couple of different spots. Pitchers that are going to have really good stuff that plays well at the lower levels. I think the best way I heard it described, even down at Surprise, that the Royals system, though, around the league, it's considered to be not good. I just think the Royals have top-end elite talent. I think they've got a lot of good ball players, 1 through 30. I think there's a lot of guys that are going to get to Kansas City at some point or be traded in a package and make it to the big league somewhere else. I don't think it's where it was back in, 2016, 17, and 18, where there just wasn't much coming up or not many guys that could even get to Kansas City. I think there are some big league ball players and successful ones at that, but you're not really going to hear about them until they actually get to the big league. It's not going to be a situation like Baltimore where they just have top 100 after top 100 after top 100. But that was kind of my takeaways from the top 30 list. Not surprised, Blake Mitchell, your first round pick from last year, he's going to be number one overall. Caden Wallace is the number 2 overall prospect in the system. I think Nick Lofton is actually right behind him, and we've already seen a little bit of Nick Lofton. So some of those prospects in the top 10, they're either on the cusp of Kansas City, have already been to Kansas City, or might even crack the opening day roster. Who knows? We still got 3 weeks to go, but as of right now, no real complaints except for Javier Vaz being a little bit low, in my opinion, and Blake Walters being a little bit too low. I'd imagine both those guys are going to rise in no time. Well, before we move on to our final segment, want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. When we return, Jordan Lyles is apparently okay from the little injury scare that he had fielding a ground ball earlier in the week. And I'm going to tell you why it is important that he comes out healthy from spring training. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at John_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the other sponsor today in Prize. And we're always very proud to tell you about what's going on with PrizePicks, because even though football may be over, the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of the year. Get in on the excitement with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into some serious cash. Because right now, you can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks, just 4. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks. So here is what you need to do over at PrizePicks, because it is very important to use our code here after downloading the app. So first, of course, you got to go and download that app and then use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit of $100. Again, that code is LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100. Go get started over on PrizePicks today. Well, the important thing about spring training is that no matter what player it is, they got to come out healthy. Like, you do not want to be dipping into your second and third options right out of spring training. That's never a good sign. This could be a guy that's not very good in your lineup, in your rotation, in your bullpen. For example, if Hunter Dozier would have been banged up in spring training last year, it would not have been a good thing for the team, even though he turned in the season that he did, because you're already having to go to option B. And so option B, due to injury, is thrown into the fire. And the fear becomes, well, what if he doesn't play well or he gets hurt? And let's say that happens in April. Now we're down to the third option this early in the season. You always want that ability to turn to somebody else on your own. You never want to have to be forced into that decision because of spring training. And I know that a lot of people don't want Jordan Lyles to be in the rotation. You saw what you needed to see last year. You didn't want him back. You wanted somebody else to take that spot and run with it. I was somebody that was very vocal on this podcast about not putting Jordan Lyles back on the team, for that matter. And I remember exactly what I said. I believe it was along the lines of, if Jordan Lyles is still on this team by spring training, then J.J. Bacole can't convince us that he's serious about winning. However, here he is. He is going to be in the rotation, assuming that this back tightness, this back soreness goes away. And it sounds like from camp, all things are positive, that he felt better leaving the complex. He was even throwing today. Not too much concern in that area. And I knew the minute that Andy Rodgers does a great job and has been doing an awesome job down in Surprise, reporting everything you possibly can on a day-to-day basis. I remember when that came out, my first thought was there's going to be a lot of people that say, awesome. Now we don't have to worry about Jordan Lyles. Let's go out there and spend money in free agency and get a better number 5. Let's go get Greinke. Let's put Daniel Lynch there. Let's put Serpa there. Let's put Marsh there. You had all these different options, but I looked at it and said, this is not a good thing. Okay, because number one, there is nobody, in my opinion, that is so overly deserving of the 5th spot right now and just is forcing their way in rotation. And yes, that is after our opening segment today of talking about Serpa and talking about Marsh. I don't think there's a need to rush it. I really don't. As I said at the beginning of this segment, you want to be able to make the decision. You don't want to be forced into that. Like if Jordan Lyles starts opening day or not, he's on the opening day roster, that's what I should say. And he's the 5th guy. And he pitches okay. All right. Let's say he's got a 5.00 ERA. Not great, but better than last year. Like, he may have a start where he gives you 6 innings, gives up 5 runs, or he may go 5 innings and only give up 3. And you just kind of every single time out. You get to that 4.8 to 5.0 range with an ERA, and you're just commanding the zone, not walking too many guys, taking some heat off your bullpen. Like, he can do that now in the 5th spot. And if he does that, you can sit back for a little bit the first couple months of the year and go, we don't need to make that change. And then if things go south or you really want an upgrade and Alec Marsh and Serpa are pitching well out of the bullpen, well, then you could turn to them and go. Now we make that upgrade. My issue is, especially with the rotation, the last thing you want in spring training is already to be down a guy. Because, okay, let's say it is Marsh. Let's say Marsh goes into the 5th spot. Well, now Marsh has to take that spot and go the majority of the season, or at least for a little bit. And if he can't, now you're on to option 3. I want to feel like the Royals can look at their 5th spot and go, we'll see who gets it, but we want to make that choice ourselves. If we need to move somebody, we're moving them because they're not pitching well enough, not because they're injured. And if an injury does happen, you're hoping it's coming at a time where that transition can be pretty smooth. As I said, even with Alec Marsh and Serpa pitching well in spring training, it is spring training. Alec Marsh didn't have the best of numbers last year. Serpa hasn't even thrown more than 50 innings in a season yet. That stuff can go against you. And if we're going to talk about not throwing Reagans into the limelight as an opening day starter, who knows if Alec Marsh and Serpa can be an every 5th day guy right now at the beginning of the year. We know they can late in the season when they're 40 to 50 games under 500 like they were last year. But this year, it's a little bit different. I would like those 2 guys to be eased into bullpen roles because I think they can thrive there. But for Lyles, he may not be good. He may be bad again. I'm not trying to say buy stock on Jordan Lyles. He's going to be much better now. My point of it is you got to stay healthy with the rotation. If you can stay healthy in the rotation through spring training, I feel a lot better about this depth moving forward. Because if Lyles does struggle in the first 2 months, now I can have the hook. I'm the one doing it, or the Royals are the one doing it. When they can be the team that makes that decision and not be forced to by injury before there's even a regular season game, that's the side I'm going to want to be on. I want to see this team have that power in their hands, not have it stripped away due to injury. So I think it's a good thing that whatever he dealt with, the little back tightness, the back soreness, it seems like it's going to resolve itself in plenty of time before opening day, which is just now 21 days away. Crazy stuff. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can also check us out on wherever you get your podcast, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. And one last thing we want to do is give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now at Free Fire TV channels app. We're not going to have an episode tomorrow or Monday. I'm going to be out of town, but we will do a mailbag on my Twitter account. Again, that's at JohnnyJ_15. I'll try to answer your questions Friday morning. And even though we won't have an episode Friday or Monday, going to have it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday to get to that 5 episode a week threshold next week. But until Tuesday, you take it easy, Kansas City.